We'll call this finance meeting to order. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, I need a motion to adopt the agenda, but we're going to delete item number 7, the closed session, unless anybody. Moved by Commissioner Brown, supported by Commissioner Romano. Any questions? Please vote. Excuse me, item passes 13-0. Next, we'll move on to public participation. Does anyone wish to be heard? And please step forward, state your name for the record. And this is on agenda items only.
Yes. My name is Joseph White.
Okay, to press the button, there's a button right there.
Yeah, I got it. My name is Joseph White. I'm a Roseville resident.
It's
Just let it go. There you go.
okay.
Okay. My name is Joseph White. I'm a Roseville resident. My wife is also a plaintiff down here, and we're, very interested in the organization of Macomb. My wife brought a case down here in 2007. This is 2012. That case is coming back down here another month. It's the Brenda White versus Southeast Surgical Hospital, Dr. Gary Dotz, Travelers Insurance and EDS Care Management. The reason I'm mentioning it is because I had asked Eric Smith, like in 2012, would he please, examine some of the improprieties in this case, and he refused.
I do appreciate that, but it isn't relative to this agenda item. Please understand that.
Only reason it's relevant is because Karen Springer told me about a year ago that she found improprieties in the funding in Eric Smith's office, and she's not here to speak for herself. That's it.
Okay, thank you.
With the permission of the board?
Go ahead.
Very good. Madam Chairman, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the board. Good afternoon. My name is Timothy Barkovic. I want to thank the board for an opportunity during this public portion of the meeting to speak briefly on the matter before the board, if I may.
Go ahead.
Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, today is a decision to be made by this board as to whether a forensic audit should be conducted regarding the activities of our county prosecutor, Eric Smith. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you, as trustees of the funds of this county and representatives of the voting public, to authorize such an audit. In fact, expedite the audit as quickly as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, I was one of the original plaintiffs in a Freedom of Information lawsuit brought by myself and Mr. Kuzmano on behalf of Mr. Maynard. And he and I were lucky enough through Corporation Counsel to receive in their totality all the checks written by Mr. Smith in reference to alleged expenditures. And ladies and gentlemen, I went through those checks individually and meticulously, and all I can say is I found any number of suspicious transactions. A number of checks on their very face suggest any number of financial improprieties. For instance, ladies and gentlemen, there were 4 accounts. There was an OWI forfeiture account and a drug forfeiture account. Checks written out of those are by statute required to go to a specific purpose. By law, Mr. Smith was mandated to use those funds for a specific purpose. Yet, in going through the checks, I find out that he uses these checks for flowers, retirement parties, parking, and payment of credit cards that we know nothing about. I've not seen those credit cards. I've not seen whose names they're in. I haven't seen any billings on the credit cards. And for instance, out of the Warren Drug Court account, he paid an exorbitant amount for parking for county employees during the construction of the parking structure. Other county employees apparently weren't so lucky as to have their employer pay exorbitant amounts to secure parking on their behalf. The checks in their totality also suggest that there were any number of expenditures that were not for a public purpose or a public benefit. And all public expenditures must meet those two criteria. Now, Eric Smith has come here, either himself personally or through his representatives, and said, I invite an audit. I've got nothing to hide. Go ahead, audit me. My books, my records, everything is open. But ladies and gentlemen, he speaks out of both sides of his mouth, because every time anyone asks him any specific questions regarding these accounts and these expenditures, we get no answers. And Eric Smith has a history of deception, deceit.
I'm already there. Thank you. I wish you would refrain from the personal attacks. I know if you're speaking to the audit, continue speaking to the audit.
I am.
But we're not putting somebody on trial here.
Madam.
And you're not going to stand in front of me and call anybody names or make accusations. I'm running this meeting.
Very good. Thank you.
So if you can finish up with that in mind, thank you.
Well, I will tell you, I will give you factual support to back up my statement, Madam
That
Chairman.
doesn't matter. If you make one more statement that I find to be an offensive attack, you will be done speaking. Thank you. You have 1 minute.
For instance, when this matter first came to the public's attention back in August, the treasurer, our treasurer, asked Mr. Smith to have Plant and Moran audit these accounts, and Mr. Smith refused. At that time, ladies and gentlemen, he changed the tax ID numbers on the account to a non-public entity. And recently I read in the newspaper, he said the reason he changed the account numbers was so that the treasurer could not get control of these accounts. And that reason makes absolutely no sense to me, and it should not to the board. In addition, ladies and gentlemen, he refused to cooperate with our county treasurer and engaged in an attempt to, again, hide his actions. I was then forced, ladies and gentlemen, to file a Freedom of Information request. Eric Smith responded to my Freedom of Information request.
You have about 15 seconds.
Got it.
Okay.
Saying, public funds, I'm not going to show you these accounts. Whatever's in these accounts is private. Public funds, ladies and gentlemen, are never private. We were forced to litigate. During the course of the litigation, I asked Mr. Smith to appear for a deposition. He refused to do so. He refused to appear for a deposition, although he holds us to the black letter of the law.
Okay, thank you. I gave you notice of a minute and then 15 seconds, and you said okay.
I'm almost done, madam. May I extend my time for one more moment?
No, thank you. I'm keeping everybody to the same limit. Thank you.
Which is, Madam Chairman,
which is 5 minutes. Do I really have to call somebody up here to have you removed? Thank you.
I resent that comment.
I understand that.
Okay?
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to be heard? Now I know that you're going to behave.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I rise to indicate to the chair that the Open Meetings Act is very clear. You can't exclude anyone from a meeting.
Oh, if they're disrupting the meeting, I can, and if they're not following the rules, so, okay, go ahead.
Well, I would just beg to differ in that they have to be disturbing the peace, which is a term of art under the law. I'm not here to demonize Eric Smith or any other department head. I'll just say, obviously, these actions that have been taken in regards to these accounts undermines the confidence in government. The taxpayers entrust its government officials with their hard-earned tax dollars and expect accountability, transparency, and internal controls from their county government. I'm not going to go into the minutiae of it all. I will note that there are more Freedom of Information Act requests being filed. They are being met with further non-responsive responses. When I say that, for example, I asked for certain reimbursements of expenses for certain employees in the prosecutor's office. I received a thumb drive, which took an inordinate long period of time to download. I realized that that they had downloaded every single transaction for 2017, which amounted to, when it was fully combined, all the files, 9,796 pages, of which one line was for Eric Smith's, which is what was requested, with several other employees, one or two pages of that 9,000 pages. This has all the telltale signs of someone who's not being transparent, not being forthright, and I would indicate that the only way to get to the bottom of it and restore public confidence in the government of the county with regards to these public funds is through an audit. I would also indicate that the board remembers me, or many members of the board, regarding Karen Spranger. There can't be two sets of rules, one for Karen Spranger, one for Eric Smith, or any other department head. Article 6 says that there's one county under the charter. Eric Smith doesn't have control over these funds, and I understand he, at the last minute, filed some brief papers with the board. That's rumor, but that's also subject to FOIA as well. I'd ask that the board vote in the affirmative to restore public confidence and have an audit of these accounts, a full forensic audit with the full backup. There's another FOIA request out, so another FOIA lawsuit's going to be filed exposing the county to more attorney's fees when that is successful, and I have every reason to believe that it will be successful. These are public funds and therefore subject to the Freedom of Information Act. Thank you.
Thank you, and would the record reflect that that was Frank Cusmano speaking? I'm being told that you forgot to say it and I forgot to say it. Thank you. No, that's okay, thank you.
Frank Cusmano, I'm a Macomb County resident, Macomb Township for over 20 years, 30 years in Macomb County, and I'm proud to be a Macomb County resident. Thank you.
Thank you. Please step forward, state your name.
My name's Kevin Brown. I live in the Township of Ray. I was born in Macomb County. This is a black mark on the county. I really hope that it doesn't become political between Republicans and Democrats. I think there should be an audit. I don't know what comes down after somebody's found to be mishandling of funds. I don't know where your bylaws go with that, but I mean, there's a lot of people, not many people come out to these meetings, I know that, but you got to wonder, this man is the head of the law division of this county, and he has to have known what he was doing was wrong. I'm not going to slander the man, but I think you need to really think about how this is going to look. I mean, it needs to be thoroughly looked into. I hope that Mr. Hackle gets involved somewhere here. I know you probably have control over it to a certain extent, but it's very sad to see that somebody would do this and try to hide it this way. And when there has to be so many FOIA requests, when they're talking out of both sides of their face, they want transparency, but yet he's not coming forward. And I really hope all you people really take this seriously, because I think it's really a black mark on the whole county, to be honest with you. And how people can have any kind of trust after this is, especially with him in his office. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone else wish to be heard? Seeing none, we'll close the first hearing of the public. Item number 5, presentations, Finance Director's quarterly report. Director Smeagol.
Good Good afternoon, Commissioners. Try to keep my comments brief. If you have any questions, of course, always willing to take those and do my best to answer them here or follow up with you at a subsequent meeting or otherwise. I always try to keep my comments brief and concentrate mainly on the general fund. At the end of the fourth quarter, revenues in the general fund were about 94% of actual. We have several accruals that we're still in the process of making. As you know, December 31st is our year end, so we're busy preparing for our annual audit and closing year end. Again, there are several revenue accruals. I expect the revenues to be closer to 100%, maybe a little bit over. On the expense side, expenses are about 93%. Most of those are closed at this point in time. The biggest expense, of course, is payroll, so that's all finalized. We may have some accruals here or there, and I'm more than willing to, come back in another month or so and give you a better idea of really where we stand as of year end. I told you back in the fall that we were probably looking at somewhere around a $4 million surplus. I don't have any indication that anything different than that's going to happen. But again, once we finalize year end, I will come back and give you a report.
Okay, is there a motion to receive and file? Moved by Brown, supported by Leonetti. Commissioner Carabelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve, real quick, you show a deficit unfavorable in the property taxes. Is that just a collection of it?
That's one of those main accruals that we make at the end of the year. So throughout the course of the year, property taxes are more or less recorded on a cash basis. So of course, we levy our taxes in July, and then we have to make accruals for the receivables for the unpaid portion at the end of the year. So that's one of the bigger accruals we make at the end of the year.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Brown.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. We made changes at the end of the cycle, the last budget year, moving funds on, especially out of the capital fund and all the maturations that we did. Are those reflective in these numbers now? Or
No, that's all new for 2019.
Okay.
All those changes are new.
Okay.
And those things will be reflected in quarterly reports starting with the first quarter of this year.
All right. Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman.
Thank you. Seeing no other speakers, there's a motion in support. Please vote. Motion passes 13-0. Now we have the Treasurer's Office fourth quarterly report.
Good afternoon.
Okay, Ms. Miller?
Yes, Christina Miller,
Thank
Investment
you.
Officer for Treasurer Rocca. And I'm here today to present the fourth quarter of 2018 investment portfolio and the 2019 depository list. If you guys have any questions?
First, let me get a motion to receive and file, moved by Brown, supported by Myjack. I don't see any speakers. Please vote. Motion passes 13-0. Thank you. Okay. Department recommendations. A, First Amendment to the 2015 Macomb County Intermediate Retirees Medical Benefits Trust Agreement. Motion by Commissioner Brown. Is there support? Support by Commissioner Sauger. Director Smigiel.
Good afternoon again. You have before you a request to make a slight language change in Section 5D of the Retirees Healthcare Intermediate Trust Agreement. And that change would allow us, the Intermediate Trust Board, to transfer more than 100% of the annual required contribution from the Intermediate Trust Fund to the Retiree Healthcare Trust Fund. And just as a reminder for everybody, I'm sure you remember that when we issued the bonds in 2015 to fund our unfunded liability for retiree health care at the time, those proceeds, along with an additional $59 million from the general fund, were placed into this intermediate trust fund. The money is invested in very similar, in some cases identical investment vehicles as the pension fund. every year when the actuaries do their evaluation of the retiree healthcare fund, which is a trust fund that's been established since 1997 here in the county, that's the fund that actually pays the premiums and all the bills and administrative costs of administering the retiree healthcare program here at the county. So every year, the actuaries do a evaluation, just as they do for the pension fund. They make their recommendation and tell us how much money should be transferred from or contributed to the retiree healthcare fund to fund current year and future year benefits. The mechanics of it are the money is transferred from the intermediate trust or the bond proceeds to the retiree healthcare fund. That's just an internal transfer. When the agreement was created, the intermediate trust agreement, the idea was to always transfer 100%, never anything less. But, as you know, a couple of years ago, the state passed legislation, Public Act 202, which set parameters for funding levels for other post-employment benefit plans. In the case of called OPEB plans, most generally retiree health care. That statute requires a 40% funding level and the annual required contribution not to exceed 12% of general fund revenues as defined by the state. That such a thing was not contemplated when we put this together. So what we're trying to accomplish here is to allow us to transfer a lump sum of money if we need to in the future. Say the state raises that limit to 50%. We're in compliance today, but maybe they'll raise it to 50%. Or maybe the threshold for general fund revenues is dropped to 10%. The thresholds for pension funding are 60% funding and the annual required contribution not to exceed 10% of general fund revenues. This is meant to provide us flexibility to make moves in an efficient manner if we need to comply with state law. That's the basic idea here. And it's a slight change, highlighted in red, again, to never transfer less than 100%, but allow us to transfer more if we need to. So.
Thank you. Commissioner Duge.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Steve. The question I have is, are we going to be inundated with emails from retirees saying that we're taking away or changing their health care?
No.
Are you sure?
This has nothing to do with benefit levels, nothing. This particular motion, this particular action has nothing to do with benefit structure, benefit plans.
Well, I know that and you know that. Do they know that?
I'm not sure if they know it or not.
Okay.
This has nothing, this is moving money from one fund to another to
I
be able to
understand that.
provide those benefits to those folks.
Well, okay.
I'm not trying to be argumentative, I'm just.
No, and I appreciate it, but we've had enough information thrown at us.
Oh, I'm aware, yeah.
About how we're supposedly trying to change all the retiree health care. And I just want to know is there any way anybody can misconstrue some of this?
I don't see how they can, but that's.
Neither do I, but
That's.
Thank you,
I can't
Madam
speak
Chair.
for everyone, of course.
Thank you. Commissioner Romano.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to read a statement here because there's some language changes here. And our statement reads from the recommendation sheet, the language change being requested has been reviewed and approved by independent legal counsel for both the intermediate trust as well as the Board of Commissioners. So having legal look at it,
And corp
approve
counsel
it,
as well. So it went through corp counsel on the civic clerk approval process.
and it's all been approved.
It's all been approved.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Ha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Steve, this is just procedural to keep us in
Procedural, that's
compliance
absolutely
with
all it
state
is.
law. Is there a newsletter that goes out to the retirees for a brief explanation of what this is, could address our fellow commissioners' concerns?
I can talk with Mr. Brumbaugh, the retiree representative on the pension board. They have a group, they have an association.
Great.
And we could include that. I'll talk to George. I don't personally see a benefit to that, but if it would make, in everybody's mind, if it might make it easier or smoother to avoid looking for a word here, input from retirees, then I'll talk to George about that.
Great. We appreciate George's
Yep.
input. Better to be proactive than react.
Don't disagree.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner Sager.
Well, there you are.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chairman. The only time you hear something about the retiree situation is at the county luncheon they have once a year. There's not a newsletter that goes out, and too many of them are informed of negative stuff, and then they come here and they gripe and complain about it, and before you know it, you're reading about it in the paper. What the heck is going on? That's a small group. The retirees are taken care of with this, what we did a couple of years ago, and there's no complaint from any ones that I know of. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other speakers. Please vote. Motion passes 13-0. Okay, the next item is the budget amendment, prosecutor forfeiture funds, forensic audit, $100,000. And Steve, I didn't get a new motion, so I wrote one up. So I think it's already on here. We came up with it today. So the new motion is motion to approve FY 2019 budget amendment for the Board of Commissioners in the amount of $100,000 by increasing contract services, professional services, with a corresponding decrease to general fund balance in order to fund a forensic. This is not the new one. In order to fund costs associated with the forensic audit in the prosecutor's office. That's the latest version is not up here. It may be online though. The cost associated is the addition. So, Steve, is that okay? Because you didn't send a new one over, I don't think, after we talked. At least they didn't indicate that they got one. So before I seek a motion.
Yeah, I think what you just read is fine, and it will cover all costs, the cost of the auditors, any kind of fees we might have to pay to, receive records and things of that nature. So I think it's fine. It's fine coming from the general fund. If we want to reimburse the general fund later, that's fine with me. I think more importantly, find a funding source and have the audit done. That's
okay. Very good. Yeah, there is a discussion that we may ultimately fund this with forfeiture funds, but is there a motion for that? Who's moved by Carabelli, supported by Leonetti? Give me a second here. I don't see any questions. Please vote. Motion passes 13-0. There is no closed session, so resolutions. A resolution designating public fund depositories, excuse me, in compliance with Act 40, Public Act of 1932. Is there a motion? Moved by Carabelli, support by Sager. I'm sorry, I'm a little under the weather today. I don't see any speakers. Please vote. Oh, I've got some here. Thank you.
I know, right? Thank you.
I think that's the motion passes 13-0. Item B, resolution regarding forfeiture funds. Before I seek a motion on this, I want to speak to a couple of things. The first is several people have asked me, I heard you spoke to this person, I heard you spoke to that person. I want everybody to know in putting this together, I did not speak to the county executive, the county prosecutor, or the county treasurer. There were requests to meet with people, but as the chair of this, I wanted to put this together just on the information I had and not on anybody's influence. As you know probably by the resolution, I'm going to be recommending UHY. Again, I had been meeting with UHY discussing this when the treasurer put out a letter requesting us use UHY, and that was also put in the newspaper, putting me in a position of possibly looking like I was following somebody or siding with somebody, which wasn't the case. I was already talking to UHY, so that complicated things. So I wanted to make that also clear. The last thing is both the treasurer's office and the prosecutor's office were afforded the opportunity to give a little background a couple of weeks ago on this issue. There was also a comment in the newspaper about why the board didn't handle this sooner. There was a question made. So I wanted to address that specific question because I think it's important. In 2015, during a budget meeting, there were three commissioners that asked questions specifically with regard to this fund. Commissioner Vosberg asked where it was in the budget, and the prosecutor explained that it wasn't in the budget, and as he still stands, he explained that this was state funds. He reported to the state. My understanding is he still has that belief. I asked if the funds were audited. Well, that question wasn't specifically answered. The insinuation was that the state had never chosen to audit them. And then Commissioner Sabatini asked why this budget was different than the other forfeiture fund budgets he was looking at in the budget. Those particular ones, the prosecutor said were federal funds, so that they had different rules. Then the 2016 audit meeting, which was on 8/31/2017, this again came up because this time it showed up in the audit. In the audit, it was listed as a significant deficiency. The auditor who spoke referred to it as insignificant bank accounts and indicated he had spoken with management and that they were looking into the issue. And before our next audit meeting, the following year, they did look into the issue, but I'll touch on that in a minute. He went on to say, and I wrote this down because it was different the following year, a lot of times a drug forfeiture account won't be on the books because of confidentiality, but technically it should be. Commissioner Leonetti asked, have remedial steps been taken, and will the proper department head be notified? The auditors indicated that they were working with administration on the issue, and they named a particular department head who would be assuring that communication. Anyway, they went on to indicate that the amount was very small in comparison to the total budget. 9/17/17, Commissioner Carabelli asked the prosecutor about this particular issue, and had anybody talked to him yet, and nobody had talked to him yet. So that was the end of that, and at that point, commissioners were under the understanding that administration was going to deal with this issue, and they would be working with the auditors to do that. Now, having said that, I have to defend administration. They did get to it that year. It was just later in the year. There's a reason for that. Our house was on fire here, folks. Every single day, there was a problem in the clerk's office, the executive's office, the finance department, this board, everybody was dealing with that problem on a daily basis. Once that was finally resolved, my understanding is that the discussions did start relative to this issue. And there was a point at times where we thought that it had been resolved, but apparently it had not. So that lays to rest why this commission had not addressed it at an earlier date. We were aware of it, and we were under the understanding that it was being addressed. And I think that once the bigger issue was addressed, administration did indeed address this issue. So with that, we have a resolution, and the resolution doesn't state a specified number of years, but I've looked at all of the checks the bank statements. I've thought about what our fiduciary duty is. I've looked at the record retentions for Macomb County, and as well as I've been told about some statute of limitations. I am seeking a motion to approve this resolution regarding the forfeiture funds from 2012 through 2018. Is there a motion? So moved. Moved by Carabelli, support by Myjack. All right, and Commissioner Ha.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for that explanation. I greatly appreciate it. Before we vote on this, I had previously heard 14 different definitions of what a forensic audit is. Could we please have somebody that knows what a forensic audit is explain it to us, the process, the end result, and any other information that would be beneficial to all in attendance?
Okay, sure. We have Chris Peterson here with UHY, and we also have our current auditors here as well, if they would choose to answer any questions.
And Madam Chair, I can also maybe just provide some context and introduce as well.
Well, all right, we'll start with you then.
Okay. All right, thank you. So essentially, the forensic audit, as that terminology is used here, is meant to distinguish the auditing and financial checking procedures that may be asked and the board is considering to do, is to distinguish that from the year-over-year audit that Plant Moran does on behalf of the county. A forensic audit, essentially in plain language, is a special, more detailed and in-depth and specific purpose investigation from a financial perspective of the accounts that are at issue, that is the forfeiture funds. It's very plain. What the board may be considering to do here as part of engaging as presented in the resolution UHY is that it may contain or could be characterized in the following phases or developments. First is to just take a look at dollars in, how they were handled, and dollars out, and also then take a look at what the final destination of dollars out is, and then take a look at how those relate to accounting best practices and statutory and ordinance or procedure requirements for that, and then to look at how those were handled over the years from the 2012 timeframe or the years going back. And then lastly, to include a report that is a written report back to the board. So that's a very kind of a high-level look at what would be done as part of this forensic audit.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Would you like to speak to it, Mr. Peterson? And just before he starts, the reason I picked them was I called people who had gone through forensic audits before. I understood that they had a forensic team that specializes in this area. I wanted to go with a known entity that had been through this, already knew what they were doing, and this is who I did a telephone conference with them and spoke to them at great length before making this decision. So without that, I'll let you speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, Commissioners. My name is Chris Peterson. I run the Fraud and Forensic Investigation Division at UHY. I reside here in Southeast Michigan, and I've worked for the county previously on a forensic investigation a couple years ago involving the Department of Public Works and Candace Miller. To speak briefly to your question, Commissioner, a forensic audit really isn't an audit. Forensic means rises to the level of evidence that could be used in a court of law. Not that it will be, but that's the level that we're held at when we do forensic accounting work. That's different than what Plant Moran does for your audits of your financial statements, where they're making an opinion on the fairness and the lack of material misstatements in the financial statements. So they're opining on financial statements. I would be forming an opinion on specific issues, allegations, and whatever evidence I accumulate would rise to the level of being satisfactory to use in a court of law.
Thank you, Commissioner Gillette.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is it necessary to specify January 1st, 2012 through November 30th, 2018, when the funds were turned over?
I think that the fiscal years are pretty determined, so I think that's okay.
Okay,
We're doing 2012 all the way through 2018, the entirety of those years. Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Duge.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Couple of things. First of all, since you've done these before, how long do you think this is going to take you?
I wish I could answer that succinctly and accurately at this time.
I'm not asking about accurately. How about a ballpark? Is it going to be in the next 6 months?
This is a question I get on every investigation.
Okay.
And here's my answer. It depends. If the information that we need is readily accessible,
right,
then it's a fairly efficient process. That's rarely the case. There's usually missing information, and I understand an important aspect of what we're looking at doing here has to do with the verification of certain types of expenditures. And that verification, if not readily available, may involve interviews or contacting vendors, all of which could take some time.
Okay.
So it could be a 45-day process, it could be a 90-day process, just depending on the level of verification that's needed.
Okay, that was question one. Question two is to the chair. We make a point of trying to get bidding on services at this level. Was this bid out, or is it based on?
It wasn't bid out, and I thought about this. And this has been in the papers, and it's been an issue kind of hanging over everybody's head in the county for some time. And to go through that process and then interview, I thought would put it off a couple more months. The reason we have records from 2012 to now is because of the bank's retention period, and we're losing more of that time. And I also felt there's just time was of the essence to address this issue. So I made that decision on my own, and I take responsibility for that.
Well, fair enough. After everything's said and done, I don't have a problem with this happening. But I would have preferred to have it bid out.
Well,
I understand, and I understand the reason why it was not.
And I do have to clarify, this isn't my decision. This is just a recommendation, so.
Fair. But if we're allocating X amount of dollars for this, and you come up with a final bill of $99,500, I'm not going to be real comfortable with that either. So I
Commissioner,
think.
if I could speak to that comment?
Yes, sir.
I've worked with the county before. Our last project was delivered on time and under budget.
Okay. I hope you can do that this time way under budget. Let's put it that way. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Ha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In seeking further clarification, you have completed your audit review. You have prepared a written report. Let's assume you find something that you, in the forensic audit, ascertain to be questionable. What happens next? Where does that go? What's the process? So we.
Yeah,
Point of information?
I may answer that. If it's in the resolution, what we did is we put, do you want to speak to it?
Well, that's why I said point of information.
Go ahead.
If I could. And Madam Chair, instead of arguing who answers it, if we want to defer to the attorney on this, the law clearly states what has to happen here. It's not an option for this board to make a decision of one way or the other. The law clearly states what has to be done with this, and if you want to defer to the attorney, we can.
Well, if I may, thank
Sure.
you, Commissioner. I understood. I wanted to make sure the general populace understood, so the report doesn't come back here and.
It will come back
Yes,
here, but it.
I understand.
Okay, then we'll have you speak to that, Pete.
The short answer is that upon receipt of a report, if there's a determination of if there's a statutory violation, then the statute requires referral to the appropriate authorities. And in this case, it would include the Attorney General.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Would you please introduce the gentleman who's speaking for behalf?
This is our independent counsel, Pete Webster, who is helping us through the process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sauger.
How long did it take you to do the Public Works audit, from the time you started till you finished?
45 days,
45 days?
approximately.
Okay, that's good enough, thank you.
And just with respect to the 100,000, I have no idea what kind of costs we're looking into. And I was also, aware that we're also having attorneys' costs involved in this as well. So, so I don't know if it's above, if it's below this. I don't want you guys to think that the 100,000 was intended to give you an idea. My understanding is the resolution, and Pete had indicated that hopefully there'd be a preliminary review, and he might be able to give back just a preliminary report of maybe the length of time and some idea of what they think the cost might be. Something to that effect if it's possible. So,
Madam Chair, if I may, as part of the draft resolution in 4E, identifies that an initial cost estimate and timetable to deliver the final written product to the Board of Commissioners would be provided as soon as reasonably possible after commencement of the process. So once essentially more information is gathered, then a more educated estimate as to timing and cost will be provided.
Commissioner Leonetti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a follow-up to Commissioner Sauger, 45 days, and how many years did you audit forensically at Public Works?
My recollection is we looked at legal fees about a 4-year period, as I recall.
4 years? Do you have a cost that you could tell us on what the final bill was for that?
I believe it was $24,000.
Okay. I don't know, each case is different. I just wanted to get a ballpark. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Duche.
Thank you on the second round. Who's the maker of the motion? Would Commissioner Carabelli add to his motion to have the board write a letter to the prosecuting attorney requesting backup information on the checks written to be forwarded to UHY?
Actually, I think he will be coordinating through the finance department, and they would together, they would be doing that.
Well, can we get a letter to somebody to say, work with these folks?
I mean, maybe we could look at having something.
If that's covered, then fine.
And maybe we could look at having something for tomorrow's agenda, but we don't have anything written up for today's
right.
to attach to this resolution.
Fair enough.
Okay, all right, so I don't see any other speakers, so please vote. Motion passes 13-0. Moving on to correspondence, can I get a motion to take these in their entirety? Moved by Gillette, supported by Kraft. Please vote. Motion passes 13-0. Is there any new business? Commissioner Lucido.
I just wanted to mention, yesterday I went over to Macomb County Animal Control, and the dogs that were taken from the Sterling Heights home have all been placed. So I wanted to congratulate Chief Randazzo and his staff. They've worked really, really hard on that. So it was good to see a positive thing.
Thank you. Any other new business? Commissioner Duge.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to let people know that UAW Local 909 is having a prayer vigil on Friday, the 22nd, starting at 3:30 for 30 minutes at the power train on 9 and Mound, that they're closing that plant down.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other new business? Okay, moving on to public participation. Does anyone wish to be heard? Hi.
Mike.
I just wanted to add to my
And
comments.
Tim Barkovic. Go ahead.
Timothy Barkovic.
Timothy,
correct.
sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
A resident of Harrison Township and a taxpayer in this county. Madam Chair, I sometimes am not aware of the limitations of time placed on me, and I excuse myself, and I ask the board to excuse me in terms of going over the limit. I just have two comments. I was talking about the Freedom of Information litigation that I was involved with, and I can report, and I'm glad that the representative doing the audit is here, because I learned two important facts that I want to notify the board members about, and also notify the representative from UHY about. While I was in court, it was a few Mondays ago, before the Honorable Edward Servito, who handled the FOI litigation, I asked for production of the actual checkbooks of the forfeiture accounts. And I was informed by the representative from the prosecutor's office and the attorney from the prosecutor's office, who was representing Mr. Smith, Mr. Van Lan, that the checkbooks were destroyed. And I think that's important for the board to know, because if the board members, and I'm sure they have, reviewed the checks, a number of these checks were handwritten. And I was told that they were on some type of computer program, and I asked for the computer program, and they said that the computer program does not exist. I am also informed that in reference to these suspected accounts, there are no receipts, no invoices, no billings, or no backup or supporting documents. So I think our auditor is going to have a very difficult time substantiating some of these expenses, because I tried to do it through the FOI lawsuit and we could not. So I wanted the board members to know that the mystery regarding these four accounts deepens, particularly with regard to receipts and existence of the checkbooks. And I thank the board.
Thank you. Thank you. Does anyone else wish to be heard? No, you just turned it off.
Turn it off? Oh, it's on now?
Yes.
Okay, my name is Joseph White. You know, I too know something about independent audits. You know, the organization I used to work for, Detroit East Community Mental Health and Gateway Community Mental Health, they did an independent audit after I did a discovery for 2 years down there in Third Circuit Court. After the audit was done, they took $120 million from Gateway, and they closed the agency. And they also, after the discovery, they said that I was an anonymous whistleblower. So now the board is facing the issue that they did not prosecute anybody after they took that, lost that $120 million, and now the board is up under the gun because the board did not do their job. Once somebody is getting prosecuted, once somebody has to go to jail, a lot of money is involved here, and it got to be done straight, or the board is going to catch the brunt of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to be heard? Anyone else wish to be heard? Seeing none, we'll close the second hearing of the public. Motion to adjourn, moved by Gillette, supported by Duge. Please vote. And we are adjourned.